It all started with a bridge, a single narrow strip of asphalt and steel that wound over a slow-moving creek. It wasn't much to look at, just a simple two-lane bridge built decades ago by the county. But to everyone who lived beyond it, that bridge was life itself. It was the only connection between a quiet, rural stretch of land and the immaculate gated neighborhood called Creekstone Estates. Creekstone wasn't just any neighborhood. It was one of those communities where everything gleamed. Manicured lawns, imported stone facades, and cars that cost more than small houses. The kind of place where property values were whispered about like stock prices. To live there meant status, success, and a place in a community that prided itself on being exclusive. And then there was me. Or rather, the property I owned. My land sat at the very edge of Creekstone's border. Technically outside of the HOA's jurisdiction, but accessible only through their private entrance and that bridge. It had been my family's land long before Creekstone even existed. Back when the area was just farmland, before the developers carved up the hills and forests to build luxury homes, my grandfather had bought the property for pennies. He had built a modest home, raised cattle, and left it to my parents. I inherited it years later and turned it into a quiet retreat, a little escape from city life. But to the HOA, my property was a problem. They couldn't stand that someone outside was using their bridge. They couldn't bear the idea that an older farmhouse sat visible from their perfectly uniform cul-de-sacs. To them, my presence was an imperfection. It started subtly, polite letters that weren't really polite. Notes reminding me that Creekstone infrastructure is maintained by Creekstone residents, that the private road is intended for members only. I ignored them at first. After all, the bridge wasn't theirs, it was public. Or at least it had been before they petitioned to adopt it under their maintenance plan years ago. Still, they pressed on. Small inconveniences turned into clear harassment. They posted security guards at the entrance who checked IDs, though they always made me wait. My mailbox was mysteriously knocked down 3 times in 1 month. And when the HOA installed new street cameras, I noticed that every single one faced the direction of my property's access road. At first, it was almost amusing, an entitled group of homeowners acting like they ruled the world. But over time, it became more sinister. Then came the letter that changed everything. The HOA board had voted to restrict non-member access to Creekstone's internal roads and bridge for safety reasons. They claimed it was to prevent liability in case of accidents. According to them, since I wasn't a dues-paying member, they had no legal obligation to provide access. I thought it was just another threat, another attempt to intimidate me into selling. I was wrong. One crisp morning in early spring, I drove down to the bridge, only to find it blocked. Massive concrete barriers stood across the entrance, with reflective orange cones neatly placed in front of them. Fresh, road closed, private property signs were bolted to metal poles. And behind it all, a bright white HOA maintenance truck sat idling, with 2 men in reflective vests standing guard. It didn't seem real at first. For a long moment, I just sat there, engine running, staring at the barricade like it was some kind of mistake. But there was no mistake. They had done it. The HOA had physically cut off the only road to my property. I had no way out. The bridge wasn't just my main route. It was my only one. The creek below was too deep to cross, and the land on the other side was dense, rocky woodland. The old county maps showed that before Creekstone existed, there had been a dirt access road that wound around the back of the hill. But that had been absorbed and fenced off when the subdivision was built. For the first time, I felt trapped, boxed in by the very community that had claimed to be protecting quality of life. In the days that followed, things spiraled quickly. When I tried to contact the HOA board, no one responded. When I reached out to the county office, they told me the bridge was technically on HOA-maintained land now, and that disputes of that kind were civil matters. Translation: they wouldn't help. Even deliveries stopped coming. The mail truck turned around at the barricade, and my online orders were marked undeliverable. The garbage collection company refused to cross the bridge after receiving a private road notice from Creekstone management. I started hauling my own trash out in the bed of my truck, parking at the barricade, lifting the bags over by hand. That was when the rumors started spreading. Neighbors in Creekstone began whispering that I was being evicted, that I was violating private property laws. A few even spread stories online claiming I was squatting on land I didn't own. The HOA had built a narrative, painting me as the problem, a stubborn holdout refusing to cooperate with community guidelines. But underneath all the polite phrasing and legal jargon, I knew the truth. They wanted me gone. My property sat right along the planned expansion area for Creekstone's new Phase 3 development, a luxury row of estate homes that would sell for over $2 million each. My land was the last piece they couldn't control. Without it, their development would remain incomplete. And so, they had decided to force me out. It was a strategy that felt almost surgical: to isolate, to frustrate, to starve me out of access and convenience until I had no choice but to sell. But they had underestimated how far I was willing to go to fight back. At first, I thought about calling lawyers, about filing for an injunction. But that required time and money. And while I started making calls, the days turned into weeks. Supplies dwindled, access became harder, and the HOA's grip tightened. They thought they could wait me out. They thought wrong. Because one evening, as the sun went down over the creek and the barricades cast long shadows across the road, I saw something that changed everything. A new construction crew arriving on the Creekstone side, setting up survey equipment right near the bridge. They weren't repairing anything. They were expanding. And at that moment, I realized what the HOA's real plan was: to demolish the bridge completely. They didn't just want me gone. They wanted to erase any trace that my property had ever existed on their side of the world. But if they thought cutting me off would make me give up, they were about to find out how wrong they were, because that bridge wasn't just their access point. It was mine too, and before they destroyed it, I planned to make sure everyone, the county, the developers, and the world, knew exactly what they'd done. As the construction lights flickered to life across the creek, I stood watching from the shadows of my driveway, my heart pounding with a strange mix of anger and resolve. The HOA thought they could build a wall. I was about to show them what happens when you try to trap someone on their own land. The morning after I saw the construction crew arrive, everything about Creekstone Estates felt different. It wasn't just the sound of engines and machinery echoing across the creek. It was the feeling, that hum of quiet hostility, like the whole neighborhood was watching, waiting for me to disappear. By sunrise, the HOA's intentions were impossible to ignore. New warning signs had gone up overnight, larger, bolder, and nailed right into the wooden guardrails of the bridge. No trespassing. Violators will be prosecuted. The words were stenciled in red block letters, the kind used for serious warnings, as if I were some kind of intruder. My property sat just on the other side of that barricade, but standing there felt like standing at a border checkpoint into enemy territory. The bridge that had once been my only way home was now lined with tape, cones, and cameras. They had even installed a portable security light that clicked on the moment I got near it, flooding me with blinding white light. The HOA wanted me to feel small, powerless. But what they didn't realize was that isolation only made me more focused. Over the next few days, I began documenting everything. Every barrier, every sign, every construction vehicle. I photographed it all and uploaded it to a cloud drive. I took drone footage of the bridge, the work site, the cul-de-sac leading into it. If they thought they could erase the truth, I planned to make sure there was a record that couldn't be buried. The construction crew worked fast. Within a week, they had stripped away the metal guardrails on one side of the bridge and brought in a small excavator. The sound of heavy machinery became the new soundtrack to my mornings. Each clank and thud echoed across the water like a countdown, and all the while, the HOA stayed silent. No phone calls, no replies to my letters, not even a courtesy email. They were ghosts, operating through construction notices and anonymous work orders. Every sign, every message came from Creekstone Property Management LLC, a corporate shell used by the board to handle disputes without ever putting their personal names on paper. It was infuriating, but I wasn't going to sit around and wait for them to bury the bridge, so I started digging. Not into the creek, but into records. Property deeds, zoning permits, historical maps. I spent late nights scouring county archives, old newspapers, and satellite imagery, and what I found made my blood boil. The bridge had never belonged to the HOA. Decades ago, it had been built as a county access point for what was then open farmland. My land included. When Creekstone was developed, the HOA petitioned for maintenance rights, but not ownership. They had agreed to maintain it in exchange for the county avoiding repair costs, but the structure itself was still technically public infrastructure, meaning they had no legal right to block it. They were pretending it was private property, banking on me not knowing any better. It was a bold move, and one that would crumble the moment anyone in authority looked too closely. But that was the trick. The HOA thrived on perception. They didn't need to be right. They just needed to act confident enough to make others believe they were. And so far, it was working. Delivery drivers refused to come near. Contractors turned down work orders. Even the local utility company said they'd need to coordinate access with the HOA. Bit by bit, they were cutting me off from the world. By the third week, I had started rationing supplies. The nearest alternate road was over 5 miles through forest, impassable for vehicles. I could walk it, but only barely. My days became a cycle of carrying groceries by hand through the trees, avoiding the HOA's cameras, and documenting every move they made. But then, things took a darker turn. One morning, I woke to the distant sound of engines again. Not the familiar whir of construction, but something heavier, deeper. When I reached the edge of my property and looked across the creek, my stomach dropped. They had brought in demolition equipment. A massive yellow excavator now sat parked at the base of the bridge, its arm extended like a weapon. A few men in safety vests stood around it, studying blueprints. They weren't just repairing or modifying. They were preparing to tear it down. There was no longer any doubt. They were cutting me off completely. The HOA had found their final move, one they assumed I couldn't stop in time. But they'd underestimated how much evidence I had already gathered. That night, under cover of darkness, I set up cameras of my own. Motion sensors. Time-lapse recorders pointed at the bridge. If they wanted to destroy it, they were going to do it on camera. I wanted undeniable proof, not just for the county, but for anyone willing to listen. Because by then, I had already started uploading pieces of the story online. Anonymous at first, under a simple title, The HOA That Cut My Road. I didn't expect much, just a few people to notice, but within days, the story exploded. Hundreds of comments poured in, then thousands. People couldn't believe it. A neighborhood so obsessed with control that they'd cut off a person's only road access. It struck a nerve. Viewers shared their own HOA horror stories, tagging local news outlets, calling it entrapment, abuse of power, and a lawsuit waiting to happen. And that's when things truly shifted. Once the story hit social media, reporters started calling. A small local news team reached out, asking if they could visit the property for an interview. I said yes, though getting them across the bridge would prove difficult. The next morning, when the crew tried to drive in, they were stopped at the barricade. The HOA's private security told them it was a restricted construction zone. So they parked at the edge, filming from a distance as I waved from across the creek, stranded on my own land. The footage went viral. The HOA's pristine image, the picture-perfect neighborhood of Creekstone Estates, shattered overnight. News headlines framed it as "Local HOA blocks homeowners' only access road." Legal experts started weighing in, questioning the legitimacy of the HOA's actions. But the HOA board wasn't going down quietly. Within 24 hours of the news story airing, I received a letter, this time by courier. It was a cease and desist notice, accusing me of defamation and unauthorized photography of their private construction project. They demanded I remove all footage and issue a public apology. It was laughable, a desperate attempt to regain control. But it also showed something important. They were scared. Because for the first time, the HOA wasn't the one writing the story. As online attention grew, county officials began fielding calls from angry residents. A few even drove out to inspect the bridge. What they found would soon become the turning point, because the HOA hadn't just overstepped, they had broken several laws by tampering with a public structure without proper permits. The bridge wasn't theirs to destroy. And yet, as the days went on, the excavator remained. Engines idled. Crews stood ready. The HOA wasn't backing down. Not yet. The stage was set on one side of the creek, a multi-million-dollar neighborhood determined to erase me. On the other, a single homeowner, armed with evidence and an audience watching the story unfold. And as the first cracks appeared in the bridge's pavement under the weight of machinery, I realized the next move would decide everything. Either I would stop them, or they would erase the road to my home forever. By the time the first cracks split through the bridge's surface, I realized that waiting for someone else to fix the problem was no longer an option. The HOA wasn't afraid of breaking rules, only of being caught breaking them. And now I had proof, attention, and momentum. All I needed was to turn that into pressure. The news coverage had done something the HOA never expected. It made Creekstone Estates famous for all the wrong reasons. The viral footage of the barricade, the bright orange "road closed" signs, and me stranded across the creek had reached more than just local viewers. People across the country were sharing it, debating it, dissecting every frame, every HOA nightmare story, every video of overreaching neighborhood boards. They all linked back to Creekstone now. The comments were merciless. People were calling it suburban tyranny, HOA overreach on steroids, the million-dollar neighborhood that trapped a homeowner. And while the HOA tried to silence me, they had only fueled the fire. Still, virality didn't fix bridges. The barricade remained. The construction crew kept showing up. And though the county had started looking into the matter, bureaucracy moved slower than the HOA's machines, so I began coordinating my own plan. One part documentation, one part exposure, and one part resistance. First came the legal side. I reached out to a property rights attorney who had seen my story online. She specialized in easements and land access disputes, the kind of lawyer HOAs hated to deal with. She offered to help pro bono, saying what the HOA did might not just be unethical but criminal. Within days, she had filed an emergency injunction request with the county court. demanding a temporary stop to all construction until ownership and access could be formally reviewed. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was a start. While she handled the legal filings, I handled the optics. I kept recording daily updates, showing the construction trucks idling by the bridge, the security lights scanning my driveway, the piles of debris growing where the asphalt had been torn up. I posted every update under the same tag. Schachters Bridge Gate. People loved it. Not because it was flashy, but because it was real. A single homeowner fighting an HOA that thought it could play kingmaker with public property. The story had a clear villain and a simple, infuriating injustice. It didn't need embellishment. As the days went on, the HOA started cracking under the pressure. Residents inside Creekstone began turning against the board. Some of them, tired of being caught in the media storm, started leaking internal memos and emails. Anonymous messages showed up in my inbox, board meeting notes, private correspondence, even drafts of the legal justification the HOA had used to seize control of the bridge. And that was the moment. Everything clicked into place. The emails revealed that the HOA had known all along that the bridge wasn't legally theirs. They had discussed it in detail months before the barricade went up, acknowledging that the county had never formally transferred ownership. One board member had even warned that cutting access could expose the association to liability. But the president, a real estate developer with ties to the company building Creekstone's next expansion, had pushed forward anyway. Their motive was now undeniable. They wanted my land, not for community safety, not for liability reasons, but because without it, their multi-million-dollar Phase 3 project couldn't connect cleanly to the main road. The bridge was in their way, and by extension, so was I. Armed with that evidence, I passed everything to my attorney, who immediately forwarded it to the county and local news stations. Within 48 hours, another story aired, this time not about a trapped homeowner, but about a developer-backed HOA caught falsifying property control claims. The fallout was immediate. County inspectors arrived at the bridge under police escort, demanding to see construction permits. The crew on site had none. Work was halted on the spot. The excavator was ordered to shut down, and the barriers were tagged with under investigation notices. For the first time in weeks, the bridge was quiet. But quiet didn't mean victory. Not yet. The HOA's president went on the defensive, issuing a public statement claiming that I was a disgruntled individual misrepresenting facts to harm property values. He called the bridge unsafe and insisted they were acting in the community's best interest. It was damage, control, and it wasn't working. Reporters started digging deeper, uncovering financial ties between the HOA board and the developer slated to profit from the land. One name appeared over and over again, the same man who had signed off on the construction order. The more they denied, the worse it got. Meanwhile, residents inside Creekstone grew restless. Some were furious that their HOA dues had funded illegal construction. Others were simply embarrassed to live in the bridge neighborhood that had gone viral. Signs of rebellion appeared, literal signs. A few residents posted banners in their yards that read, "Not my HOA," and "Bring back the bridge." It was surreal watching a once silent, perfectly manicured neighborhood fracture from the inside. But I couldn't relax yet. The bridge was still barricaded, and access to my home was technically restricted pending review. My lawyer warned me that the HOA might try to stall indefinitely, let the road decay until it was impassable, then claim it was unsafe to reopen. That's when I decided to make one final move. Using the footage, the documents, and the leaked emails, I compiled everything into a single video, part exposé, part timeline, and part call to action. I titled it, "The HOA That Tried to Erase Me." It ran 30 minutes long and showed, in painstaking detail, every step of their campaign. From the first letter they sent to the demolition attempt. I uploaded it one night at midnight. By morning, it had 1 million views. The comments flooded in again. Only this time, journalists, lawyers, and even a few politicians joined the conversation. Property rights advocates shared it, calling it a textbook case of HOA abuse. Some even mentioned using it in seminars as an example of what happens when local governance turns corrupt. The HOA board called an emergency meeting the next evening, closed to residents, of course. But by then, it didn't matter. The damage was done. Within a week, the county issued a formal cease order against Creekstone Estates, citing unauthorized modification of public infrastructure. The HOA president was fined. The management company's contract was suspended pending investigation, and, most importantly, the barricade was ordered to be removed. Crews arrived quietly one morning to dismantle the concrete blocks and remove the signs. They didn't look at me, didn't wave, didn't say a word. Just took down what they'd built, piece by piece. By afternoon, the bridge stood open again, scarred but standing, sunlight glinting off its exposed rebar like the aftermath of a war. I stood at its edge for a long time, just watching the water move beneath it. It didn't feel like victory exactly, more like survival. The kind of win that costs you months of stress and sleepless nights. But then again, that's what it had always been about. The HOA thought they could isolate me into silence. Instead, they made sure everyone heard me. Still, as peaceful as the bridge looked, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. The county had halted their project, but the developer wasn't gone, and Creekstone's board wasn't finished fighting. They had lost the battle, but the war for the land was far from done. And as I watched a lone pickup truck drive slowly across the reopened bridge, the first vehicle to do so in weeks, I realized something important. The bridge had never really been theirs. It had never really been mine either. It was proof that when people push back hard enough, even the strongest walls can crack. But deep down, I knew they'd be back, because people like that, people who think ownership equals power, never stop at one defeat. They regroup, they retaliate, and they were already planning their next move. For a few weeks after the barricades came down, it felt like peace had returned, or at least something close to it. The air over the creek was still again. No excavators, no warning sirens, no guards blocking the bridge. Neighbors began driving over it without hesitation, pretending the chaos had never happened. The county inspector's tags fluttered in the wind, reminders of the scandal that had embarrassed the entire community. The HOA's board had gone silent, their public statements drying up after the investigation began. But silence in Creekstone Estates didn't mean surrender. It meant planning. The first sign came in the form of a letter. This one didn't come from Creekstone Property Management, or even the HOA president. It arrived in an envelope marked County Department of Infrastructure. The wording was professional, polite and calculated, a notice of upcoming roadway maintenance and inspection. At first glance, it seemed routine, a safety check following the demolition attempt. But buried near the end, in fine print, was a clause authorizing temporary restricted access during structural evaluation. It didn't say who requested the inspection. It didn't have to. The HOA had found a new tactic: bureaucracy. If they couldn't block the bridge with barricades, they'd do it with paperwork. If they couldn't cut me off with concrete, they'd do it with red tape. And just like that, the same county that had ordered them to reopen the road now scheduled it for inspection. The following week, orange cones and utility trucks reappeared. The bridge was technically open, but delays piled up. Workers came and went, measuring, drilling, jotting down notes. They never stayed long, but they made sure the road was inconvenient enough that no one wanted to use it. Deliveries were once again delayed due to access issues. A few contractors I had hired to help restore my property canceled, citing restricted access concerns. The HOA didn't need a physical barrier this time. They had created a psychological one. Still, I stayed patient. The investigation into the board was still ongoing. The county had suspended Creekstone's right to manage shared infrastructure, and the board president had quietly resigned for personal reasons. The remaining members claimed they wanted to rebuild trust with the community, but anyone paying attention could see what was really happening. The HOA wasn't dying. It was molting. A new board was forming. Younger, friendlier faces, people who spoke about unity and progress. They sent glossy newsletters to residents, promising transparency and a new vision for Creekstone Estates, CT. But nestled inside those cheerful updates were subtle reminders that outside property owners, meaning me, were still a problem to be addressed. The newsletter called it an unresolved access concern affecting liability. I called it what it was: retaliation in disguise. Weeks turned into months. The bridge remained under inspection, with traffic cones still scattered along its edge. The HOA had hired a private engineering firm to evaluate long-term safety risks. See, that firm, unsurprisingly, had close ties to the developer who'd tried to buy my land before. It was a familiar playbook: disguise control as concern and exclusion as maintenance. But this time, I was ready. While they built their paper fortress, I built my case. My attorney and I began collecting every piece of correspondence, every inspection notice, every minute of drone footage showing that the bridge was perfectly sound. We even hired an independent structural engineer, one not connected to the HOA, to conduct a full assessment. His report was clear. The bridge was safe. There was no damage that warranted restriction, and no need for prolonged closure. The HOA's claims were baseless. Still, they persisted. They began issuing violation notices to residents who assisted or facilitated access to non-members. Translation: anyone who helped me cross the bridge could be fined. One Creekstone resident, a quiet, elderly man who had once brought me groceries during the blockade, received a $500 citation for unauthorized road use. It was vindictive, cruel, and perfectly calculated to isolate me again. But something had changed since the first time. The internet remembered. Every new letter, every notice, every fine. I documented it. My audience had grown since the original video. What started as a viral curiosity had turned into a dedicated following, people fascinated by the slow, relentless war between one homeowner and an entire HOA machine. They called themselves the Bridge Watch. They tracked updates, analyzed filings, and even crowdsourced legal research. What the HOA didn't understand was that they weren't just fighting me anymore. They were fighting a crowd of thousands who were watching every move they made. The story resurfaced in the news again. Headlines read, "Creekstone HOA faces renewed. Backlash over bridge access dispute." Local officials, tired of the constant public scrutiny, began distancing themselves from the HOA. The county commissioner, who once called the situation a civil matter, now called it an embarrassment. The HOA tried to issue a statement claiming I was stirring unnecessary division, but no one was buying it. Their credibility was gone, and yet, even cornered, they refused to stop. The new board started pushing a rezoning proposal to the EGE County, one that would effectively reclassify the area surrounding the bridge as private residential infrastructure. If approved, it would give them permanent control. That was their real endgame all along. They couldn't win through force or lies or intimidation, so they were trying to rewrite the rules entirely. The rezoning meeting was set for early fall, scheduled quietly, midweek, in a county office an hour away from Creekstone. They expected no one to notice, but someone did. An anonymous email landed in my inbox 2 days before the hearing, containing the full agenda, including the proposal's hidden clauses. It wasn't just about the bridge, it included plans to extend Creekstone's property boundary onto part of my land. They were trying to absorb it outright, on paper. That night, I stayed up late reviewing everything: maps, parcels, proposed jurisdictional lines. And there it was, my property marked as Potential Acquisition Zone. The HOA hadn't just retaliated, they had escalated. So I made a choice. I wouldn't just show up to the hearing. I'd bring the story with me. I announced it to my followers. The HOA is trying to take my land. Live coverage tomorrow. Within hours, it spread like wildfire. Dozens of people offered to attend in person. Local journalists RSVP'd. A live stream link was set up. The HOA didn't expect an audience. When the meeting began, the room was packed. Residents, reporters, curious onlookers. And there I was, sitting near the back, waiting as the Creekstone board tried to present their proposal like it was a minor procedural matter. But the moment they reached the section labeled Phase 3 Property Integration, the crowd turned. Reporters raised hands. Cameras rolled. Questions flew. The HOA spokesperson faltered. The county commissioner, caught off guard by the sudden attention, demanded clarification. And when they couldn't provide a legitimate explanation, the entire proposal was tabled for further review. The rezoning failed. For now. But as the meeting adjourned, I could see it in their faces. The new board wasn't done. They were embarrassed, but not broken. They left the hall with forced smiles and clenched jaws, already planning their next move. Because people like that, people who build empires out of paperwork, don't accept defeat. They adapt. And deep down, I knew what was coming next. They'd failed to block the bridge. They'd failed to take my land through zoning. The only thing left was destruction by neglect. If they couldn't make the road theirs, they'd make it useless. And soon, that quiet little bridge, the one that had stood for decades, would face its greatest threat yet. Autumn crept into Creekstone Estates like a whisper. The leaves turned gold, the air cooled, and the bridge, scarred from months of conflict, stood quietly between two worlds. From a distance, it looked peaceful again. But under the surface, tension hummed like an electrical current. The HOA had lost their rezoning attempt, but no one believed it was over. Not the residents, not the county, and certainly not me. For months I'd lived with their tactics: intimidation, isolation, bureaucracy. Every move I made, they countered with something colder, quieter. Now, they had shifted into their final phase: neglect. The new board had stopped pretending to cooperate. Maintenance reports vanished. Trash collection near the bridge couldn't be serviced due to safety concerns. The streetlights on their side of the road were shut off entirely. When I called the power company, they said Creekstone had requested temporary energy conservation near the old bridge zone. They weren't fighting me with force anymore. They were starving the infrastructure. Slowly, methodically, they were trying to let the bridge rot. It started small. A single pothole deepened each week. Left unrepaired, rainwater pooled in the cracks, and when it froze at night, it split the asphalt wider. A missing guardrail post was never replaced. Then, someone removed the under investigation tags the county had placed. By November, The bridge looked worse than it had after the construction blockade. And still, no one from Creekstone lifted a finger. The HOA's tactic was simple. Let nature do what they couldn't legally do. Let the road decay until the county declared it unsafe and closed it themselves. Then they wouldn't be the villains. They'd be the concerned citizens. It was slow, brilliant, and cruel. But what they didn't know was that I had been preparing for this exact moment. Ever since the rezoning hearing, I'd been quietly working with a local journalist and my attorney to uncover something much deeper. Not just the HOA's harassment, but the money behind it. The reporter had started digging through public records, tracing the web of LLCs tied to Creekstone's management. What she found made everything click into focus. The developer who once led the HOA had set up shell companies to buy parcels of land under different names, land that bordered mine. Through these entities, they were trying to acquire property for a new luxury entrance that would bypass the existing bridge entirely. If they succeeded, they wouldn't just cut me off. They'd make the bridge obsolete, a forgotten relic of a road to nowhere. The story was ready, but we needed proof that the HOA was deliberately sabotaging the bridge's condition. So, over the next few weeks, I installed new cameras, not just one or two, but an entire network hidden in tree lines and under guardrails. Night vision, motion detection, live stream capable. And then I waited. It didn't take long. One night in early December, just after midnight, the motion alerts went off. 3 figures appeared on the feed. Reflective vests, unmarked pickup truck, no county insignia. They weren't inspectors. They weren't road crews. They were Creekstone contractors. The footage showed them dumping gravel and debris directly into the drainage channels along the bridge's edge, deliberately clogging them. Within days, heavy rain flooded the road, washing out part of the shoulder. It was the final piece of evidence. I packaged the footage, time-stamped and geotagged, and sent it to the journalist. She verified it with county timestamps, matching the truck's license plate to a company owned by, of course, the same developer who had resigned from the HOA. When the story broke, it wasn't a local headline this time. It was national. Luxury HOA caught sabotaging public bridge to force out homeowner. The footage played across networks, social media, and forums dedicated to HOA horror stories. It was undeniable, a coordinated effort to destroy infrastructure for profit. And just like that, Creekstone Estates went from a prestigious neighborhood to a nationwide punchline. The county launched a full investigation. Environmental agencies got involved because of the creek pollution caused by the sabotage. Lawsuits were filed, not just by me, but by Creekstone residents themselves, furious that their dues had been used to commit what one attorney called intentional property damage. The board members began resigning one by one. Some disappeared from the area entirely. The developers' shell companies were subpoenaed, and through it all, I stayed quiet, letting the evidence speak for itself. It took months, but eventually, the county issued a final order. Creekstone Estates was stripped of all control over the bridge and its connecting roads. The HOA was fined, and the bridge was designated a protected public access route. They couldn't touch it again. When the repair crews arrived, legitimate ones this time, they worked for days, resurfacing the asphalt, restoring the rails, and reopening the full span. The first time I drove across it again, it felt unreal. The road that had once been blocked, flooded, sabotaged, now smooth, clean, and quiet. The sun hit the metal rails and made them shimmer like glass. I slowed down halfway, stopping to look at the water below. The creek flowed steady, carrying away months of debris, washing the mud and gravel out to where no one could see it anymore. For the first time in a long time, I felt free, but freedom came with a cost. The whole ordeal had changed everything. My quiet rural retreat was now famous, or infamous. Reporters still emailed occasionally, asking for updates. People drove by sometimes just to see the bridge from the videos. I'd become a symbol of something bigger than myself, the person who stood up to an HOA and won. But victory wasn't about attention or headlines. It was about the principle, about proving that even the most powerful organizations couldn't erase someone's rights just because they wanted the land under their feet. In the end, Creekstone's luxury expansion project was cancelled. The developer sold off his remaining holdings. The HOA, once proud and pristine, was restructured under county supervision. They lost everything they tried to take. And as winter settled over the water, the bridge, rebuilt and stronger, became something more than a road. It became a reminder that control can crumble, that truth can outlast intimidation, and that sometimes the smallest fight, one homeowner against a board, can ripple far beyond what anyone expects. Standing there one evening, the cold wind brushing across my face, I thought about everything that had happened. Every barricade, every notice, every threat. They had cut the bridge to force me out. But in the end, it connected me to something they never understood. People who cared about justice, about fairness, about standing up when someone says, "You can't." The HOA had tried to bury me in silence. Instead, they built a platform beneath me. And now, as the sun dipped behind Creekstone's rooftops and the light turned gold across the water, the bridge stood untouched, open, steady, and unbreakable, the same way I intended to stay.